Well, I want to take back up this whole concept of the rigged economy and the whole way in which the system has increasingly been rigged, including the news media, which makes it much harder to profoundly change what's going on. I'm also going to refer you to a couple things that will be at Gingrich Productions. As you probably know, I do 2 newsletters a week, which you can sign up for free at gingrichproductions.com. In addition, we are posting at Gingrich Productions the video clip from C-SPAN from 1995. What?
We posted the link on Facebook.
Okay, we're posting. I've just been told by Christina that we're actually posting the link on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
And this is, it's already there. This is a link to a very brief section of Bill Clinton's 1995 State of the Union. The first one when I was Speaker, so the guy sitting right behind him, you have Al Gore and Newt Gingrich right there. And it's interesting because when you listen to Clinton in January of 1995, he sounds like Donald Trump talking about immigration. He talks about controlling the border. He talks about increasing the number of border guards. He talks about deporting criminal aliens. He talks about the rule of law and the need to enforce the law. If you get a chance, take a look at it. Now, I included that in part to make the case that part of what's been happening is in the 21 years since that State of the Union, the attitude of the left has gone so far to the left that everything Bill Clinton said as president in the 1995 State of the Union would now be totally opposed by his own party, because they now have a totally different sense of how they want to rig the game. And to get a sense of how they rigged the game, the second thing, and I'm going to check with Christina, have we also posted the San Diego piece?
They're all in the promo.
Okay, in the promo post, there's also a link to a remarkable San Diego news report from this last week, about a 6-minute report in which their investigative reporter goes to the border. Now, you've had all this talk about immigration, all this talk about reform, all this talk about how the president wants to tighten up. And when you watch this 6 minutes, you compare it to what Bill Clinton said in January of 1995 when he's talking about the rule of law, the need to control the border, the need to deport those who are criminals, etc. And then look at these interviews with Border Patrol agents who say, first of all, that nowadays around San Diego, the people who are crossing the border illegally don't run away from the Border Patrol, they run towards them. And they say, oh, we're here, we're political refugees, we're afraid to go back, so you have to leave, let us stay here. And then they say, and by the way, President Obama said we should come. So we're here because President Obama told us we should come to America. And this reporter, now this is not Fox News, this is not some conservative group, this is a straight investigative reporter in San Diego. And this reporter says he talked to one border guard who said, they had a guy come across who said, I'm really worried about my safety, and by the way, I have a bad heart. The next thing you know, he's in an American hospital being paid for by the American taxpayer, because the rules that we've now adopted not only welcome you into America illegally, but they start opening up all of our services to you. So there's a hospital bed not being used that particular day by an American citizen because somebody came across from Mexico illegally and claimed the right to be taken care of by the United States taxpayers. You have to see the San Diego report to realize how bad it is and to realize how totally out of control it is. And that's why people think the game is rigged. If you and I break the law, we have a real consequence. But if the people that the left favors break the law, they get taken care of. One last example out of that particular report, which I really recommend highly because it's such an amazing bit of local news. It's not national news. It's not biased. It's not left or right. It's just a local reporter going down to see what's actually going on. The other point I would make that was very striking We used to round up people coming across the border, put them on a bus, take them back into Mexico, and unload the bus. Now, we take them to the San Diego trolley stop. And we say, gee, if you want to take the trolley south, you can go back to Mexico, but if you don't want to take the trolley south, you can go anywhere you want to. Well, guess what? They didn't cross the border in order to go back to Mexico. So what you have is, right now, this is not theoretical, this is not some political statement. If you watch the San Diego local news report, you have a system totally out of control. In effect, it's been rigged in favor of people who want to break the law. It's been rigged in favor of people who are favored by the elites. It's been rigged to such a degree that one border patrolman talks about the fact that they actually printed documents across Central America saying, President Obama is inviting you to come to America. So when people feel that the system is out of control and that the game has been rigged against honest, hardworking, law-abiding people, and by the way, that includes honest, hard-working, law-abiding immigrants. I mean, somebody who has obeyed the law, waited in line, done everything legally, is just as much disadvantaged by this as people who were born here in the first place. So everybody who's here legally has an interest in not rigging the game in favor of those who come here illegally. Let me also suggest to you, and you'll hear me say this fairly often if you tune in, that I really urge you to read Sam Quinones's book. It's Q-U-I-N, it's Quinones, Dreamland, which I found, Senator Rob Portman suggested it. Senator Portman's been the leading advocate for opioid recovery in the U.S. Senate and is very aware of the problems we have with a crisis of addiction and a crisis of people dying from overdoses, where opioid overdoses now kill more people than automobiles. First time, I think, in modern history that the automobile is no longer the leading cause of accidental death. Senator Portman told me the other day I had to read Dreamland, so I got a copy of it. It is a challenging book because it has so much material. But when you read it, you'll never think quite the same again. He weaves together a story of Mexican heroin, one small neighborhood, one small area in Mexico, entrepreneurship basically modeled off Domino's Pizza, and an ability to intersect with people who've already been conditioned to take opiates because of legal U.S. drug companies and because of doctors who basically broke their oath and were creating pill mills where one of them prescribed 2 million pills a year. Much of it paid for by the taxpayer, because something I'd never considered is a number of people who want to get on disability, not for the monthly disability check, but to get the Medicaid card that would then pay for all the drugs they got. And then they would go out and see 5 or 6 different doctors. And so their total volume of drug purchase was amazing. I cannot recommend too highly. Read Dreamland and think about what it tells us about how messed up and how broken the American system is right now, in our inability to enforce the law, in our inability to enforce practical common sense, in our inability to structure things like Medicaid and our prescription laws in a way that makes them effective. It's really a very, very astonishing book. Now, Joe Piazza says, please discuss the pros and cons of the Federal Reserve quantitative easing. Do you think it was more of a benefit to the economy or the stock market? Well, I think that's one of the places where the game has been rigged. The Federal Reserve has followed a policy which has been terrific if you're a big bank. It's been terrific if you own a lot of stock. It's been terrible if you're a retired person who has saved all of your life and who was counting on interest on your savings in order to be able to have a solid, prosperous retirement. It's the kind of manipulation by a small group of people, about a dozen people, sitting in a room, most of whom, by the way, have never held a private sector job. If they've had a private sector job, it's almost certainly been as an analyst. But they haven't actually gone out and manufactured anything. They haven't gone out and met a customer. They haven't gone out and met the test of the market. And most of them are academics, and they have this theory, Keynesian economics, and their theory is that if they can somehow drive down the cost of money to a point where everybody has enough money, that will lead to an increase in demand. This is a fight we had in the 1970s. I was part of it, along with Jack Kemp and Ronald Reagan, and we were arguing for a model called supply-side economics. And supply-side economics said what you really want to do is encourage small businesses, entrepreneurs, manufacturers, people to go out and create things. And if you encourage enough people to go out and found enough new companies, create enough new factories, develop enough new technology, then you have no inflation because the sheer growth in productivity will put people to work, and you'll be creating real wealth. The Keynesian model basically mistakes paper for real wealth and thinks that if you can cheat everybody who's saved, that's what they're doing. Federal Reserve today cheats every senior citizen in America who's saved. They are enormously biased in favor of the stock market and the big banks as a matter of ideology. Let me be clear, this is not a conspiracy. This isn't a handful of people who get together in a closed room and cut deals. This is an ideology based on the idea that if you take care of the quantity of money available, then somehow magical good things will happen. I come out of a school that Ronald Reagan campaigned on and that Jack Kemp helped develop, with a number of intellectuals, the most famous of whom was Art Laffer, who developed what was called the Laffer curve, proving that there's an optimum point of taxes, and if you raise them above that point, you actually lose money as people start avoiding the behavior that's taxed. This fight's been going on for a long time. In many ways, you could argue it goes all the way back to general economics of the 19th century. What we're seeing is a game rigged by academics on behalf of a theory which doesn't work and which has built an enormous bubble. The fact is that there is this huge volume of money out there without goods and services to back it up. And the fact you add a couple of zeros, if I tell you that next year you're going to be a millionaire, but by the way, the price of a cheeseburger is going to be $2 million, you're not going to feel richer. You're going to feel poorer. And I think there's a real danger that we now have such a distorted economy because of these academic theories that it's going to be very painful and very difficult to work our way out of this mess. Kent Williams, what would you tell someone who believes that removing regulations will result in environmental or social disaster? Well, I'd say, first of all, it depends on what regulation you're going to remove. And it depends on how much common sense you have. Let me give you an example. We have had a forest policy of not cleaning out the forest, of not having small burns, of not allowing prudent, scientifically based conservation. The result is we have bigger fires than we used to. They're hotter fires than they used to be. They burn old trees that used to be resistant when they had milder, smaller fires. The trees get sicker, and as a result, you get beetle infestations that kill millions of trees. And generally speaking, the state forest programs are better managed and do a better job of having a healthy forest than the federal government because of the rules that have been adopted that are just foolish and that make no sense at all. So I think it depends on which regulation you're talking about. In Colorado, you've had the Environmental Protection Agency responsible for a mining disaster that was the direct fault of the EPA. So I don't automatically assume that these agencies make sense, but there are tons of regulations. If you go talk to small business about how much paper do they fill out for the federal government that no one ever reads. I mean, one good ground rule would be the federal government's not allowed to gather reports that it's not going to read. And you would automatically free up doctors and hospitals and small businesses and pharmacies from lots and lots of absolute make-work uselessness. So I do think you could dramatically improve the outcomes while reducing the red tape in a way that would increase the number of new businesses and the number of new jobs. Mark Daly says the Fed is not controlled by the government. Can they still be audited? Well, of course the Fed's controlled by the government. It's only independent in an abstract sense. It is an agency of the federal government. It ultimately could be changed at any time by the Congress and the President if they simply passed a law to change it. The President appoints the Board of Governors and has an immediate impact by appointing different governors. If you had a supply side board of governors right now who were worried about the value of money rather than the quantity of money, you would see a totally different situation. Now, one of the things we have to worry about is that to get from where we are today to where we need to be healthy is going to be a very, very challenging situation. And I think that we have to recognize that we're going to go through some tummy aches, if you will, trying to get rid of the Keynesian system, trying to return to a real marketplace, trying to encourage entrepreneurs to create new businesses. And I think one of the great challenges for the next administration is going to be how do you start to unrig a game without bringing about a collapse of the system? Because the way this thing is now structured, any serious effort to get back to a monetary policy that has honest, accurate interest rates is going to be very painful in the short run. It's going to take a year or 18 months of transition, and it will shock a lot of people who've never lived in an environment in the last 15 years where they had to deal with economic reality because the Federal Reserve keeps pumping out more and more money trying to hide from reality. Cindy Duke Spray says, why has it taken so long for all of this rigged system to get addressed? Well, I think there have always been people who were very skeptical of the system. You can go all the way back to David Stockman, who was Ronald Reagan's director of the budget and who by 1983 was very critical of what Congress and the president were doing. You can look at, frankly, Ron Paul, who has for years talked about the Federal Reserve. So there have been people out there talking about it. But I think what happened was after we came out of the crisis of 2008 and people began to look around, they began to realize how much the system wasn't working. And as they looked at, the Dodd-Frank bill, which was supposed to control big banks, but instead has had the unexpected effect of making the big banks bigger and making it harder for small credit unions and small banks, people began to scratch their heads and say there's something profoundly wrong. And then when they watched crony capitalism, where people got huge government grants, set up companies, went bankrupt, or had the company sold to the Chinese, again, it felt like the fix was in, that things were just rigged in a way that's not working. And then you have the absolute practical reality that over the last 10 years, according to Gallup, 25 million Americans have dropped out of the middle class. Well, they start looking around saying, hey, there's something wrong here. If I get up every morning, I'm just as educated as I used to be. I'm prepared to go to work, and now I can't find work. And the real unemployment number is probably closer to 10% at least. And there was a very sobering article by Nick Eberstadt from the American Enterprise Institute on Labor Day in the Wall Street Journal, where he points out that probably 10 million men have stopped looking for work. They're not unemployed. They're not even trying. 10 million. Well, that's pretty sobering. And I think as people have looked at all this different kind of data, they've begun to realize that something profound is wrong. And of course, you've had a Tea Party movement since 2010. You've had more and more pressure on Congress. You've had greater and greater anger about centralized government. So something is building, and of course it broke loose this year on both the right with Trump and on the left with Sanders, and frankly also on the right with Cruz. So the number one and number two Republican candidates both represented a populist anger against the rigged system, and the man who got an extraordinary number of votes when people didn't think he could, again on the left with Bernie Sanders, represented a real attack on a rigged system. Suzanne Tolan, how does Obama send all this money to Iran without someone asking questions, or was this approved by Congress? Well, my guess is you're going to start getting hearings about this in the Congress. He didn't ask anybody's approval. And again, this is why people think the game is rigged. I mean, you look up one morning, and I don't know the exact number right now, so you should check it and not take my word for it. But apparently we're now up to something like $1.2 billion or $1.3 billion in cash. I want you just to think about this. And you want to know why people think the system's rigged? You're told the U.S. government was to have a technical loophole because the American law still today says you cannot transfer assets from American banks to Iran. The law also says, by the way, you can't do it by a third party. So they're clearly breaking the law. and they thought they'd be clever. And so what they've done is they've taken American dollars, translated them into euros, Swiss francs, yen. Think about this. An airplane full is apparently $400 billion in cash. I mean, this is absurd. This is why people, normal, everyday, practical people, think the system's rigged. You see $400 billion in an airplane in cash, by the way, generally in $50 and $100 bills or less. And you say to yourself, this looks like it's a drug payoff. I mean, this is an absurdity. For the United States government is reduced to paying, in effect, ransom or to paying some kind of homage to the Iranian dictatorship. So in their mind, they think this is tribute. Look, we have cowed the Americans. And by the way, notice that the Iranians, instead of backing off, they now have their ships harassing our ships. They're moving more aggressively in Syria. They're moving more aggressively in Iraq. So the game is rigged internationally. If you're the enemy of the United States, you get taken care of. Yeah. How about how about a couple $1 billion? I'm sorry, I had the numbers on. There's $1.2 billion total. So each airplane was only 400 million. So I apologize, I got the number wrong. It's only about 400 million per plane, but that's apparently a plane full of cash. Now, personally, because I'm not a greedy person, I'd have taken, say, 2 first-class seats full. That would have made me happy. I don't need an entire airplane full of cash. But nobody from the government called to ask if I'd like any money, nor did they ask any other Americans. So you and me, we American taxpayers, are watching the insanity. I was about to wrap up and we had a technical glitch apparently, and the internet went out or something. Anyway, I want to let you know I'm going to be doing a lot more talking about this whole zone of the economy, the way it's rigged, politics, the way it's rigged, the news media, the way it's rigged. Because after all, I've been at this a long time, and the longer I've been at it, the more convinced I am that we are a system now that is in real trouble, and we're in real trouble because the people in the elites are rigging the game, and they're rigging the game against the average American, and they're rigging the game against the truth. And if you have any doubt about that, look at Hillary Clinton's continual unending lies. Look at the Obama administration's continual unending lies about the Iranian payments. Every time you turn around, there's something goofy. Take a look at the report that we have posted from San Diego on the border and ask yourself, how could any healthy, self-respecting country have a border that is run this stupidly? And it's not an accident. It's a deliberate desire by our elites to drown us in a system which would change us permanently. And I think it's wrong. I think it's dangerous. And I think we as Americans have an obligation to do something about it. And I'll report more on this in the future.